Across the globe, pristine oceans and coastlines are rapidly being integrated into a vast, heavily industrialized energy grid. This expansion is driven by the large-scale installation of submarine transmission cables and offshore wind farms. While this infrastructure is critical for meeting global energy targets, it introduces high-intensity anthropogenic electromagnetic fields into aquatic ecosystems. Current regulatory frameworks and project planning typically treat this deployment as ecologically safe, relying on established predictive models. Multi-billion-dollar investment strategies for these projects currently operate on the assumption that these safety models are both accurate and exhaustive. Historically, environmental liabilities often emerge when new research connects scientific disciplines that were previously studied in isolation. So marine infrastructure, that intersection exists between high-power electromagnetic systems and aquatic species that rely on electromagnetic sensing. In the context of project liability, the absence of definitive proof of harm is not proof of safety. This unresolved scientific uncertainty represents an unquantified material risk. The ability of aquatic species to detect electric and magnetic fields is a well-documented biological reality. These mechanisms, known as magnetoreception and electroreception, are survival tools used for spatial orientation, finding prey, and coordinating migration. Sharks and rays utilize these senses to detect the weak electrical signals generated by the muscle movements of their prey. Migratory species, including salmon and eels, navigate vast distances by reading naturally occurring geomagnetic information. High-resolution tracking has documented mysterious, repeated circling. Researchers hypothesize that these animals are pausing to gather environmental magnetic field cues to orient themselves within the ocean. Marine organisms depend on the ocean's complex electromagnetic topography for survival, which makes them inherently vulnerable to artificial disruptions. Government agencies, including the DOE and BOEM, acknowledge that anthropogenic electromagnetic fields are detectable by aquatic organisms. To quantify these interactions, the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory conducted specific laboratory exposure studies. The studies used species like the Dungeness crab to represent vulnerable bottom-dwelling populations. They also included fish species frequently found in offshore development areas, such as the Atlantic halibut. Commercial invertebrates, including the American lobster, were also subjected to high-intensity exposure tests. Researchers exposed these subjects to electromagnetic field levels comparable to the upper range expected from human-made infrastructure. The baseline findings showed no clear evidence of strong, immediate avoidance or attraction behavior. However, the data revealed statistically significant changes in how the animals used space and altered their activity patterns. These laboratory studies cannot account for the variables found in the wild, the specific sensitivities of juvenile life stages, or impacts on long-distance migration. While empirical evidence shows that anthropogenic electromagnetic fields interact with marine life, laboratory constraints make it impossible to define the long-term ecological consequences. Beyond biology, the physics of radiofrequency and electromagnetic engineering reveals a gap in how these fields are predicted. Planners apply land-based math to marine environments, assuming signals decay smoothly. But water breaks these assumptions, fracturing the curve into erratic patterns. The surface acts as an efficient reflector, carrying signals further. When these reflected pathways cross, they create localized pockets of elevated field strength. U.S. Navy propagation guidance specifically warns about these anomalous over-water signal behaviors. This includes atmospheric ducting, where radiofrequency waves become trapped horizontally against the water surface, traveling vast distances without weakening. When compared with initial predictions, actual exposure levels frequently exceed generalized land-based models. These physical modifiers also impact estuaries, reservoirs, and coastal environments, where complex land-water interactions occur. Applying simplified terrestrial math to aquatic environments underestimates the true spatial footprint of electromagnetic exposure. Highly sensitive biological organisms are navigating an environment where human-made signals behave in erratic, amplified ways. These zones of unpredictable physical exposure overlap directly with the habitats of specialized species that rely on delicate sensory mechanisms. Current risk assessments rarely account for cumulative effects, the overlapping exposure from multiple adjacent infrastructure sources. Government studies continue to highlight unanswered questions regarding the impacts of long-term chronic exposure. There is also a lack of data regarding the vulnerability of species during juvenile and early life stages. The available literature is currently insufficient to confidently exclude meaningful population-level ecological consequences. Commercial fisheries and complex coastal waterways frequently become targets for intense, retroactive regulatory scrutiny after the infrastructure is already deployed. Relying solely on generalized predictive modeling rather than site-specific measurements excludes potential physical and biological modifiers from the final project valuation. Due diligence now requires project managers to evaluate local EMF-sensitive species and model waterways as active radiofrequency modifiers. In the expansion of marine infrastructure, assuming the absence of risk without proof of safety is a failure of due diligence. Unresolved scientific uncertainty must be recognized as a material liability today.